Hello everyone, welcome to the next history lecture series on modern Indian history. So in the last lecture series we discussed about introduction to the revolt of 1857, the beginnings, the causes of the revolt of 1857. In this lecture we will speak about the course of the revolt of 1857, what actually happened during the 1857 revolt. It's very important to know what actually happened on the ground when the 1857 revolt happened. Broadly covering some areas within 1857 revolt are the chronology, geographical spread, outbreak, major centers, key battles, and process of British reconquest. These are the broad headings which will come under the course of the revolt of 1857. We will get to it one by one. Of course, it started during 1857 and it was formally ended during 1859 when the British finally controlled or stopped this revolt. It actually went for almost 2 years. It started from 1857 and ended in 1859. That was a broader chronology or the time period of the revolt of 1857. We'll get into each specific details during the course of this slide. What was the major triggering point? Yes, in the last lecture series we had discussed about the larger causes of the 1857 revolt, which was spread across the beginning of the first half of the 19th century. There were many long-standing causes which we discussed. But then in the last lecture series, we also discussed about the immediate triggering factor, the immediate cause, which was related to the allegation among the sepoys or the soldiers that the cartridges that they were supposed to bite before shooting were filled with cow and pig fat. And for Hindus, cow is considered to be holy, and for Muslims, pig is considered to be unholy. So it was against their religious beliefs. So it was mentioned in the last lecture series that there was the fear of conversion to Christianity that was very much there among the sepoys. This was the immediate triggering point. Even though there are no factual or evidentiary based approach or some actual evidence of whether they actually stuffed pig and cow meat, we don't have any historical proof, but then it spread as a rumor among the soldiers that the Britishers had intentionally stuffed cow and pig fat, and that was a major triggering factor behind the 1857 revolt. And of course it started among the soldiers or the sepoys. A famous historical personality is there, Mangal Pandey. I think many of you might have seen the movie of Mangal Pandey, which was acted by the famous Amir Khan in Bollywood. It was released in 2004 or 2005. It was a major film that showed about the life of Mangal Pandey. Likewise, an actual historical personality was there named Mangal Pandey. He was a soldier or sepoy of the British army. So he belonged to an upper caste. He was a Brahmin from Uttar Pradesh and he was a soldier in the British army. He was a sepoy in the British army, and he actually was the first person to revolt against the English. He was a major leader of 1857 revolt. He in fact tried to shoot a Surgeon General Major, a high British military official he tried to assassinate a higher British official. It took lots of courage for an Indian sepoy or an Indian soldier to attempt to assassinate a British high officer. That was the level of anger or frustration that was there among the sepoys or the soldiers. So he actually collaborated various sepoys or soldiers to fight against the British. And what happened is when he tried to assassinate that British soldier, the other British officials told the other Indian sepoys or the Indian soldiers to catch him. But what happened? None of the soldiers caught him. The soldiers showed disloyalty. The soldiers collectively showed resistance. They stood with Mangal Pandey, and you see that he becomes a major center or the epicenter of the revolt of 1857. It's very important to know about Mangal Pandey because there have been some questions that were asked about Mangal Pandey in the previous year UPSC questions. So that was the triggering point or the initial phase of 1857 revolt. And you see that on April 8, 1857, he was court-martialed. So among the military people, there is this punishment of court-martial. So whenever a military person commits any crime or any act of resistance, then against the state, then this military person will be punished. They might be sentenced to prison, they might be hung, they might be executed. So likewise, you see Mangal Pandey was also executed. He was court-martialed, he was punished by the army, and he was also executed on 8 April 1857. You also see that slowly and steadily many of these sepoys' anger was accumulating and they were turning against the British. After Mangal Pandey's death on 9 May 1857, sepoys of the 3rd Bengal Light Cavalry. So cavalry means basically horses, soldiers who ride in the horses during the course of war. So even though the location of the revolt was in present day Uttar Pradesh, you see that they were named after certain presidencies like Bengal Regiment, like that. So this 3rd Bengal Light Cavalry, some of the sepoys or the soldiers actually resisted during 9 May 1857 and they were court-martialed. They were punished. And one of the major centers of this revolt, the starting point or the epicenter of the revolt was the place called Meerut in present day Uttar Pradesh. That time it was called United Provinces. So it started from Meerut. Many of these sepoys actually started resisting from Meerut. And you see that the next day, that is 10 May 1857, some of the soldiers were being put in prison. The other soldiers, what they did is, they came and opened the prison. They freed the other sepoys or soldiers who were put in jails. So that was the level of solidarity or togetherness that evolved among the soldiers. You might have heard about the Bastille prison break that happened in France. This was like a Bastille moment in India. The Bastille prison break happened during French Revolution. Likewise, you see a prison break that is happening in India, in United Provinces among the sepoys. They are releasing the sepoys and they are collectively coming and they are killing so many British officials. They are killing so many British officials and they are marching to Delhi. So one of the major attributes of 1857 revolt is that it is an armed rebellion. Armed rebellion. It is not like Mahatma Gandhi who is doing a non-violent rebellion. This is armed. These soldiers are fighting with arms and weapons against the British. So all these soldiers or all these sepoys are actually going from Meerut to Delhi, which is the present day national capital of India. And why they are going to Delhi, we will see in the coming slides. So 11 May 1857, so each day event is happening. 9 May 1857, these soldiers are court-martialed, they are put in prison. 10 May 1857, many of these soldiers or sepoys are freeing the other soldiers. And 11 May 1857, they are marching to Delhi. And Delhi is the adjacent state, adjacent place from United Provinces. So they are marching to Delhi. They reach Delhi on 11 May 1857. And why they are going to Delhi? It is very important. They are capturing Delhi and they are seeking the support of a personality named Bahadur Shah Zafar. Who is Bahadur Shah Zafar? Bahadur Shah Zafar was an aged Mughal emperor. So there is this Mughal dynasty which is very popular in Indian history. Shah Jahan, who built Taj Mahal, Akbar the Great. Bahadur Shah Zafar was a descendant of all these great emperors of the Mughal dynasty. He is in fact called the last Mughal. There is a book by William Dalrymple called The Last Mughal, which speaks about the life of Bahadur Shah Zafar. He was a poet, he was a philosopher, He was not very much interested in wars. He was a loner. He was an introvert kind of person who wanted to read, write, express love through poetry, but he was still a Mughal ruler, a Mughal patriarch. So many of these soldiers, they wanted to go much before the British, and they associated it with Mughals. Their emotional bonding, emotional association was with the Mughal dynasty, because India's pride is very much attached to Mughal dynasty. Like the Mughal emblems of Taj Mahal, Agra Fort, these are very much attached to the Indian imagination, especially the North Indian imagination. That is why many of these sepoys or soldiers went to Delhi, and they thought that their next ruler would be Bahadur Shah Zafar and not the British. They have to kill all the Britishers and re-establish the rule of the Mughals, thereby asserting their own identity. However, Bahadur Shah Zafar was initially very reluctant. He was not interested in a leadership quality because he wanted to be a poet and a philosopher. But then he was forced to surrender his will to these soldiers and sepoys. Likewise, you see this resistance spreading across Delhi. They wanted to restore the Mughal sovereignty, as mentioned in this slide, I already told, and Delhi became the center place of revolt of 1857. Then you see that this revolt is spreading across different regions in northern India, such as Awadh. We discussed about Awadh in the first lecture series. The annexation of Awadh we had discussed in detail. The deportation of Nawab Wajid Ali Shah and all we had discussed in the last slides. So you see that from Delhi, this is spreading to other regions in Uttar Pradesh as well as present-day Bihar. States like Awadh, Rohilkhand, Bihar, and even some parts of central India, which constitutes present-day Madhya Pradesh, had witnessed various acts of resistance. So this is a map of the regions where the 1857 revolt had spread. If you see the southern part of India, you don't see any part of southern India being affected. The revolt of 1857 was very much a North Indian phenomenon, North and some parts of East India. So you see most of these regions, Meerut, Delhi, Gwalior, Jhansi, Indore, Lucknow, Bareilly, Kanpur, Gorakhpur, these are the present day state, these districts are in the present day state of Uttar Pradesh and even some parts of Bihar as well, Patna, Ara, etc. So this is a map that shows the spread of 1857 revolt. It started from Meerut, then went to Delhi, and from Delhi it is getting spreaded to various other regions in Uttar Pradesh such as Bareilly, Kanpur, then Lucknow, then also Jhansi is coming in this picture. So I thought I should show this map for you to understand the areas where the 1857 revolt had spread. So as I told in the first lecture series about the causes of the revolt of 1857, even though it started from the military men or the sepoys, you see that other groups are also participating in this revolt. All the stakeholders are getting affected by 1857 revolt. So you see that certain native princes are also very much frustrated with the British colonial policies. And you see that certain native rulers are also protesting against the English colonial state. We discussed in the first lecture series about doctrine of lapse very significantly, where if there is no adopted, if there is no natural heir or son in any native state or any princely state, the English East India Company had all the rights to annex that territory. And we discussed in the last section about various princely states being annexed by English East India Company through this process. So you see that the place called Kanpur in northern India also is witnessing resistance against the British East India Company. And it is not from the sepoys. It is from a person known as Nana Sahib. So early June 1857. So we discussed about May 1857, where the sepoys are marching to Delhi, and now we are coming to June 1857, when Nana Sahib. So Nana Sahib was actually an adopted son. He was not the natural heir. He was the adopted son of Peshwa Baji Rao II. So Peshwa Baji Rao II was a native princess. It was a princely state. Kanpur was a princely state, and he had an adopted son. And because of the doctrine of lapse, Kanpur was annexed by British East India Company under Lord Dalhousie. This had made anger among the adopted son, who is Nana Sahib, and he fiercely resisted against the English East India Company. Even you see that he attacked certain British soldiers and civilians. He had attacked British soldiers and civilians, and there is a very infamous incident of the Bibigarh massacre. There is the infamous incident of the Bibigarh massacre. So Bibigarh massacre happened in a situation where many of the Britishers, including women and children, were attacked by the rebels under Nana Sahib. So one of the important things that we need to understand during the course of the 1857 revolt is that many of these Indians had attacked Britishers, including civilians, not just military persons, not just colonial officials, even civilians were being attacked by the rebels. Even women and children were being attacked by the rebels. And this had caused anger among the British. And in the later phases and in the next video lecture series, we will be discussing about the racialization that the British had towards India. The racialization policy had intensified after 1857 revolt, because many of these British civilians, including women and children, were attacked by the rebels. So you see Nana Sahib's resistance. Next we will go to two other places, Lucknow and Jhansi. Lucknow and Jhansi also became centers of revolt of 1857. When it comes to Lucknow, Lucknow was very close to Awadh. So you see that one person known as Begum Hazrat Mahal, who was the wife of Nawab Wajid Ali Shah. So we discussed about Nawab Wajid Ali Shah in the earlier lecture series about Awadh. He was deported. His wife is Begum Hazrat Mahal. So Begum Hazrat Mahal had resisted against the English East India Company. So one of the important things about 1857 revolt is that you see so many women personalities, women princesses, women queens protesting against the English East India Company. That showed the bravery and courage of our women freedom fighters. We generally don't speak high, or we don't speak much about the female participation in the freedom movement. So it is important to speak about personalities such as Begum Hazrat Mahal. And you see that in Awadh, Lucknow was very close to Awadh. So Lucknow was also a center of revolt. You see that, as I told in the last lecture series, Awadh actually, the English East India Company had introduced some very oppressive revenue taxation policies, due to which the talukdars, we discussed about talukdars in the last lecture series, the talukdars, who were the intermediary landlords, and the peasants, they also resisted. So we discussed even in the last video lecture series that it was not just a sepoy mutiny. You see all stakeholders participating in this revolt. Princes, kings, landlords, peasants, talukdars, they are also participating in this resistance. And you see that Rani Lakshmi Bai, who was from Jhansi, she was also a woman leader. She was from this place, from this princely state called Jhansi. She was the wife of the late Raja Gangadhar Rao. The territory of Jhansi was also annexed due to doctrine of lapse, because Rani Lakshmi Bai didn't have a natural son. So Rani Lakshmi Bai, who was a woman, who was very brave, like Begum Hazrat Mahal, also fought against the English East India Company. And her name is very important in Indian history. And she died bravely in 1858 at a place called Gwalior in present-day Madhya Pradesh. So you see Madhya Pradesh, which is in central part of India, also having these acts of resistance against the English East India Company. So it was not just confined to Uttar Pradesh or Delhi. It also spread to places like Madhya Pradesh, which is in central India. Now we will go to Bihar, which is also an important area of the resistance of 1857, and a person named Kunvar Singh. So, as I told you, all stakeholders had participated, and Kunvar Singh was an old zamindar. You see that even old people are taking leadership to fight against the English colonial state. So Kunvar Singh was an old zamindar, and as you see that the British East India Company is annexing territory after territory, they are annexing various lands, they are introducing various indiscriminate revenue policies. The zamindars are also resisting, and Kunvar Singh was a zamindar leader in Bihar who resisted against the English East India Company because his lands were taken away, his lands were confiscated due to these oppressive revenue policies by the English East India Company. And you see the prevalence of guerrilla warfare. What is guerrilla warfare? So guerrilla warfare was a warfare which was used by many historical personalities across the world. You might have heard about Che Guevara, one famous revolutionary leader in Latin America. He had used the method of guerrilla warfare. So guerrilla warfare means you don't directly do warfare, you hide underneath the bushes or the forest, and when your opponent is coming, suddenly you will come out of these hiding bushes and you will attack your opponent. So it was very common across, even in China during the Maoist revolution, you see practice of guerrilla warfare. So you see that even Chhatrapati Shivaji had also used guerrilla warfare. Chhatrapati Shivaji is also an important historical personality. So you see that Kunvar Singh's comrades or his allies had used guerrilla warfare to fight against the English East India Company. Not just Kunvar Singh, we also see people like Tantia Tope, who was also a rebel leader, had associated with people like Nana Sahib and did guerrilla warfare against the English East India Company. So guerrilla warfare is a very important tool of resistance during the 1857 revolt. And you see that the British had faced severe losses due to his resistance. However, he was defeated and died during 1858. So we discussed about some historical personalities, the Sepoy, the beginnings of the Sepoy mutiny, the kings, the zamindars who actually resisted against the English East India Company. How did the English East India Company finally control this movement? We'll get into that process. It is called reconquest strategy. So of course, 1857 revolt was not a full success story. Even though the Sepoys thought that they could install Bahadur Shah Zafar as the new Mughal emperor, it was not a success story. It was just an experiment because the British East India Company was far superior in military technology, arms, etc. Military technology. So they were very superior in military technology. So to fight against the British East India Company, you also needed to have very strong arms, which the North Indian rulers or the peasants or the sepoys didn't have. And because of that, the English East India Company was successful in controlling or suppressing this movement. So one by one you see that the British army or British military is being sent onto the fields, and you see direct conflict between the British as well as the Indians, and you see the British becoming successful, and you see each and every state is being reconquered. It started with Delhi. Delhi was the first place which was secured in 1857. Even though it started in 1857, the sepoys had gone to Delhi to meet Bahadur Shah Zafar. In the same year, you see, Delhi was recaptured. Slowly and steadily, they were recapturing other territories such as Lucknow, Awadh, Central India and Bihar. So whichever states were resisting, these states were slowly recaptured by the English East India Company. So certain famous generals who actually led these reconquest plans were Henry Havelock, Colin Campbell, Hugh Ross and John Lawrence. They were the important British personalities or the soldiers or the generals who led these reconquest movements. So one question arises. Was revolt of 1857 a pan-Indian revolt? No. Actually, I showed you the map. The map, it was shown that it was only spread across certain parts of UP, present-day Uttar Pradesh, Delhi, Eastern India, Bihar, certain parts of Western India. These are the only regions where the 1857 revolt had happened. So 1857 revolt cannot be called a national revolt. Even though V.D. Savarkar calls India's first war of independence, we cannot call it as an Indian war of independence because the whole of India didn't participate. The idea of nationalism, which we'll be discussing in our upcoming during the 4th lecture series, that idea of nationalism, the idea of nation was not there. It was a regional based revolt. Regionally only you see leaders participating or protesting against the English East India Company. That is why we cannot call it a national-wide revolt. That is why places like Punjab, which is in Western India, never participated. In fact, Punjab had shown loyalty towards British. Bengal in Eastern India didn't participate in the revolt. Southern India, you see Southern India, Madras Presidency, not at all participating in the revolt. So we can call that 1857 revolt was actually a regional based revolt. What are the other ways in which the English East India Company made the reconquest? They executed, they killed, they did mass executions, killed many people, many Indians, many soldiers, many common people, many civilians, many kings, they were killed. Even though you see British civilians also, there were so many fatalities, no doubt about that. Because it was an armed rebellion. Destruction of property, you see that the Britishers had destroyed the property of many of the Indians. Then you see that various punitive actions or punishments were given to various Indians. And you see that Bahadur Shah Zafar, we discussed about Bahadur Shah Zafar, who was a poet, who was not very much interested to lead this revolt. He was finally captured and he was sent to Rangoon. He was exiled to Rangoon in Burma. We don't know what happened to him after that. So it was a very sad story. 1857 revolt, the ending of 1857 revolt was also a sad story because it ended in lots of misery on both sides. It was a history of bloodshed that happened in both sides, and you see that the Indians were executed much more than the Britishers. The quantity of executions was more in the Indian side. The Indians faced lots of difficulties or lots of deaths, lots of loss because of these military actions of the British East India Company. And we told about Bibigarh massacre that happened. So Bibigarh massacre resulted in the killing of many white civilians, including women and children. So as a revenge to the Bibigarh massacre, you see the Britishers also showing revenge towards the Indians. And in the next lecture series, we'll also be talking about racial contempt. We'll be talking in the next lecture series that after 1857 revolt, the racialization of the British towards Indians had increased because they also faced lots of traumatic situations due to many civilians being killed among the British side. And how it ended. So you see that it started in April 1857 through Mangal Pandey, May 1857, and you see that in 1857 itself Delhi is getting recaptured, and you see that this revolt is spreading over a period of almost 2 years. It is getting scattered by 1858 because 1858 you see the transfer of power from English East India Company to the English Crown, which we'll be discussing in the next lecture series. But you also see that you see scattered kinds of resistance here and there. It didn't have that kind of mass appeal or mass kind of resistance that was initially there, had saturated, had diluted, and overall it took almost 2 years for this revolt to happen. And finally, during 1859, July 1859 only, the British Crown is officially proclaiming that peace has been restored in northern India. So why it is important to know about 1857 revolt is that it is not a national revolt. As I told you, it is not at all a national revolt. The major areas where it happened are we call it Gangetic Plain also. Gangetic Plain, especially in the UP region. So the plains that surround the river Ganges or Ganga. This was the major center of revolt, and it cannot be called a national revolt. And why we discuss about 1857 revolt is because it is very significant in the sense that this actually gave seeds or roots to the idea of Indian nationalism that is coming much later. We will be discussing about that in the coming lecture series. So we just thought about narrating the sacrifices that were made by many of the people who fought against the British East India Company. So it is important to acknowledge their contributions. They are our early freedom fighters who fought against the British East India Company with so much bravery because they believed that their religious beliefs, their economic conditions, their social conditions are getting affected. In the next lecture series, we will be discussing about the consequences of the revolt of 1857. What were the consequences, long-term consequences of the revolt of 1857? Not just the short-term consequences, the long-term consequences. So we divided it into three sections: the causes, the course, and the consequences. Causes was related to the introduction. Course is the one which I delivered now. And next section we'll be discussing about the consequences of the revolt of 1857 because it fed the roots or the seeds of early Indian nationalism. And why it is also important to know about the course of the revolt of 1857 is because you see certain questions that were asked in the previous year question papers of the UPSC, especially in prelims. So I will highlight two questions that came in the previous year UPSC questions. The first question is, this question came in 2021 UPSC. The question is, consider the following statements with reference to the revolt of 1857. So they have given three statements connected to 1857 revolt, and you have to tell which one is the correct statement. So the first statement is, Mangal Pandey was executed for his role in the revolt of 1857. Yes, he was executed. As I told you in this video, Bahadur Shah Zafar was proclaimed the leader of the revolt of 1857. Completely true. We discussed about it in the beginnings of this lecture series. The third one is, the annexation of Jhansi was one of the immediate causes of the revolt of 1857. We discussed about that also because Jhansi was annexed by the English East India Company due to the doctrine of lapse. So given some options, whether the first and second statement are correct, second or third statement are correct, all three statements are correct, or first and third are correct. The option is D, that is all three statements are correct. Regarding the second question, which came in UPSC prelims 2016, so it speaks about what are the major regions that had the prevalence of revolt of 1857. They have given 8 regions across India: Ajmer, Allahabad, Bareilly, Dindikal, Jhansi, Kanpur, Lucknow, Vellore. So if you see these places, Ajmer is in Rajasthan. So you see that Ajmer never had participated in 1857 revolt. You don't see Rajasthan actively participating in 1857 revolt. Allahabad also didn't have much, even though it is located in United Provinces, you don't see Allahabad being affected by 1857 revolt. Bareilly, we discussed in the slides that Bareilly was a major center of 1857 revolt. Dindikal, of course, Dindikal cannot be a major center of revolt of 1857 because it's in southern India, in Tamil Nadu. Jhansi, of course, we discussed about Jhansi, Lakshmi Bai. Kanpur, we discussed about Kanpur, Kunwar Singh, which was a major center. Lucknow, of course, Lucknow was a major center of 1857 revolt. And Vellore cannot be called a center of 1857 revolt because it is in southern India. So it is important to know about course of 1857 revolt because you see that there are previous year question papers on the course of the revolt of 1857. In the next lecture series, we will be discussing about the consequences of the revolt of 1857. Until then, take care, bye-bye, and thank you.